In the California gold rush of 1849, most of the miners who raced west with a pan and a dream went home with empty pockets. The people who quietly got rich were the ones selling the picks, the shovels, and the sturdy blue jeans. Hold on to that picture, because we are going to live inside it for the next while. It is the single most useful way I know to think clearly about the question everyone seems to be asking right now, which is some version of, how do I get rich from artificial intelligence? How do I become a billionaire in the AI world? And can I really start today? I want to be honest with you from the first minute, because this channel is about understanding the hidden systems behind everyday life, not about selling you a fantasy. Almost nobody listening to this becomes a billionaire. That is not me being gloomy. It is just arithmetic. Billionaires are statistical freaks, the far end of a very long tail. So if you are here for a magic recipe, I would gently send you somewhere else. But if you are here to genuinely understand where money forms in a technological gold rush, why it gathers in some places and evaporates in others, and what that means for an ordinary person who wants to build something real, then stay, because the principles are knowable. The map is knowable. And once you can see the map, you stop wondering and you start choosing. So let us start with the real question hiding underneath the flashy one. The flashy question is, how do I get rich from AI? The real question is much quieter and much more powerful. It is in a gold rush. Where does the durable money actually sit? Not the lucky money, not the lottery money, the durable money. The kind that keeps flowing whether or not any single prospector strikes it lucky. Let me define what I mean by artificial intelligence, just so a curious 12-year-old can ride along with us the whole way. When I say AI in this episode, I mostly mean the new wave of systems that learn patterns from enormous piles of examples and then use those patterns to write answer, summarize, draw, code, or make decisions. The headline version is the chatbot that talks back to you, but underneath that chatbot is something called a model. A model is just a very large set of learned settings, like the muscle memory a pianist builds after 1,000,000 hours of practice, except the practice happened by reading much of the internet. When a model is big and general and trained from scratch on a mountain of data, we call it a foundation model. Think of it as the raw, gleaming nugget of gold everyone is rushing toward. Hold that thought too, because in our gold rush, the foundation model is the gold. Now, here is the shape of the whole thing, and I am going to build it for you one layer at a time, like a sandwich you assemble from the bottom up. People who study this market tend to describe the AI world as a stack, which just means a tower of layers sitting on top of each other, each one depending on the one below. There are roughly 4 layers in that tower, and where you stand in the tower changes your odds of getting rich more than almost anything else you can choose. At the very bottom is the layer of chips and compute. Compute is just a plain word for a raw thinking power, the electricity, hungry machinery that does the trillions of tiny sums a model needs. These are specialized chips. And the heavy lifting is done by something called a GPU, which started life decades ago as the chip that drew video game graphics and turned out, almost by accident, to be brilliant at the exact kind of maths that AI lives on. So that is layer 1. The picks and shovels, literally. The hard physical tools every prospector must buy before they can dig. Sitting on top of the chips is layer 2, the foundation models themselves. This is the gold. The companies trying to build the smartest, most general brain in the world. You have heard their names. On top of the models is layer 3, which people call tooling and infrastructure. If the model is the engine, this is everything that turns a bare engine into a usable car. The plumbing, the databases that store information so a model can look things up, the systems that test whether a model is behaving, the wiring that lets one model call another and handwork back and forth. Unglamorous essential plumbing. And then at the very top is layer 4, the application layer. This is the part an ordinary human actually touches. The legal assistant a law firm uses. The coding helper a programmer types into. The customer service agent that answers your airline question at 2 in the morning. This is the storefront on the main street of the gold rush town, where the prospector finally spends the gold they dug up. So 4 layers, chips at the bottom, models above them, plumbing above that, applications on top. Keep the tower in your head. Now here is the first genuinely important fact, and it surprises almost everyone. So far, in this whole frenzy, the layer that has captured the most actual money is the bottom one. The chips, the picks and shovels. It is the 1849 pattern playing out again, almost too perfectly. Let me give you the cleanest example, and I will be careful with the numbers, because being careful with numbers is the whole point of this channel. The company that makes the dominant AI chips has seen its data center business, which is the part that sells the picks to everyone digging for AI gold, grow to something on the order of well over $100 billion a year, and in its most recent reported year, that part of the business grew by roughly 140%. That is not a typo and it is not hype. It is in their filings with financial regulators. And the striking thing is that the chip business now makes up more than 80% of that company's entire revenue. They started as a graphics card company for gamers, and they became the single clearest winner of the AI gold rush by selling the shovels. How big is their grip on the shovel market? Estimates vary, and I want to flag that honestly, because a lot of the precise market share figures you will hear come from analyst blogs rather than audited accounts. But the rough picture is that this one company holds somewhere around 80 to 90% of the market for AI accelerator chips. Many people cite a figure near 86%. Treat that as approximate, not gospel. And here is a small but important wrinkle. Even the people cheering for this company expect that grip to loosen over time, perhaps towards something like 75%, as the giant cloud companies design their own custom chips to avoid paying so much. There are other shovel sellers too. A couple of firms specialize in helping those giants design their own custom chips, and between them they dominate that particular niche almost completely. There is a clear number two maker of the general purpose AI chips as well. So the shovel business is not a single monopoly forever. But the headline lesson stands. The first fortunes of this rush were made selling tools to the diggers. Now let us climb up to the gold itself, layer 2, the foundation models, because this is where most people's imagination goes, and this is where I most want to slow you down. Because here is the strange part. The gold layer, the part everyone romanticizes, the part with the famous names, is, for almost everyone listening, the worst possible place to try to get rich. Let me explain why, gently, using the actual economics. Building a foundation model from scratch is staggeringly expensive. We are talking about needing billions of dollars just to buy or rent enough of those bottom layer chips, plus the electricity, plus some of the most expensive human talent on earth. And here is the part the headlines skip. Even the companies that have already done it, the famous ones at the very front of the race, are mostly losing enormous amounts of money. One leading lab was, by reports of its own internal documents, running at something like $20 billion a year in revenue by early 2026, which sounds magnificent, until you learn that it reportedly burned through something like $17 billion in cash in a single year and is projecting losses for years to come. The reported figures for its future are eye-watering, and I want to be clear, these are reported internal projections, not audited facts, so hold them loosely. But the direction is not in doubt. This is a business that does not expect to produce genuinely free cash for years. A second major lab is doing somewhat better on the shape of its business, with most of its revenue reportedly coming from companies and software developers rather than casual users, and with much healthier profit margins on each sale. But even it is only aiming to turn cash positive a few years out. So sit with that. The gold itself, the most glamorous layer, the one with the household names, is a tiny club. It costs billions to enter, and even the members are mostly bleeding money. For a new person starting today, this layer is, plainly, off limits. You cannot dig people who are willing to set fire to $20 billion a year. That is not a market you enter. That is a market you respect from a safe distance. And here is a second twist on top of that, one that matters enormously for the whole strategy. The gold itself is becoming a commodity. Let me unpack what that word means, because it is the hinge the entire episode turns on. A commodity is something where one supplier's version is more or less interchangeable with another's, like petrol or sugar or copper. You rarely feel loyal to a brand of copper. When something becomes a commodity, nobody can charge a big premium for it, because the buyer can just walk next door. Now, is that happening to AI models? The evidence says it is, and fast. Look at how the big companies that buy access to these models have shifted their spending in just a couple of years. One report on enterprise use found that the share of this professional model market held by the various leading labs has reshuffled dramatically. One lab that had a small slice a couple of years ago became the leader, largely on the strength of being great at writing code. Another that had been dominant slid down. A third climbed up from almost nothing. The exact percentages matter less than the pattern, and the pattern is loud and clear. The leadership keeps changing hands. And whenever the leader keeps changing, it tells you something profound. It tells you no single model has a real lock on its customers. People switch the moment a better one appears, which is exactly how copper behaves and exactly how a brand you love does not. So now we can state the most important strategic idea in this entire episode, and it has a slightly odd name. It is called commoditizing your complement. Stay with me, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it, and it quietly explains half the moves the giants of technology have ever made. A compliment is just a thing that gets used together with your thing. Hot dogs and hot dog buns are compliments. Cars and petrol are compliments. Here is the rule that smart strategists have known for decades. When the price of the thing next to yours falls, more people buy yours. Cheaper buns, more hot dogs sold. So, a clever company will deliberately try to make the thing next to its own product cheap, even free, because that drives a flood of demand to the thing it actually sells. Now apply that to AI. The companies building the models and the giant clouds running them have every reason to make the layers around them cheap. They want the plumbing to be cheap. They want the little applications that sit on top to be cheap and replaceable. Why? Because if everything around the model is cheap, people use more of the model, and the model is what they sell. So they are actively, deliberately working to commoditize the very layer where a newcomer might hope to set up shop. That is not a conspiracy. It is just the logic of the hot dog stand running at the scale of trillions of dollars. This is exactly why I have not promised you a fortune in layer 3. The plumbing, even though it is a genuine and busy business. Think about what the plumbing is. It is the systems that store and fetch information for a model, the tools that test whether a model is behaving itself, the wiring that lets several models handwork to each other. For a while, every team building with AI had to hand build all of that themselves, the way early settlers had to dig their own wells. And wherever people are forced to hand build the same thing over and over, there is a real business in selling them a ready-made version. So the plumbing layer is not nothing. But here is the catch, and it is the same catch wearing a different hat. The labs and the clouds keep quietly absorbing these plumbing features into the base platform itself, offering them as part of the package, which is commoditize your complement. Striking yet again. The tools that survive in the plumbing layer tend to be the ones that get more useful as the models get more powerful, not the ones that merely patch over today's weaknesses. Because patching a weakness is a business with an expiry date. The moment the next model arrives without that weakness, your patch is worthless. Some of the sharpest thinkers in this corner of the field now point to things like giving an AI a reliable long-term memory and rigorously measuring whether an AI is actually doing a good job as the frontiers worth building on, precisely because those needs grow rather than shrink as the models improve. But for a person starting today with no special edge, even the plumbing is a hard, crowded place to make a fortune. I would rather send you up to the storefront, into the land and the town, where a single human with deep local knowledge still has a real edge over a giant. Which brings us to the trap. The most common get-rich idea you will hear whispered about AI is, roughly, just to build a thin wrapper around a chatbot and charge money for it. A wrapper is a small app that takes one of the big models, dresses it up with a nice screen and a clever prompt, and resells it. Write me marketing copy. Summarize this contract. Be my study buddy. And I have to be straight with you, because the research here is strong and consistent. The thin wrapper, on its own, with nothing underneath it, is the single most fragile thing you can build. It is the prospector who shows up to the gold rush late, with no land, no tools and no town, just a clever sales pitch. Here is why, and it is a beautiful, brutal idea. One of the sharpest investors thinking about this describes it as the floor keeps rising. Picture your clever wrapper as a little house you build standing on the floor of what the models can do today. The trouble is the floor is an escalator and it is rising. Every few months, the underlying models get smarter and cheaper and absorb more abilities for free. So the clever trick you built today, the thing people paid you for, gets quietly swallowed into the base model tomorrow, offered to everyone at no charge, and your little house is suddenly standing on the open street. The same investor puts the constructive version of this beautifully. She says the future is not about selling tools. It is about selling the work, selling the outcome, the finished thing, not the gadget. So if the gold is off limits, and the thin wrapper gets swallowed, where on earth is a normal, determined person meant to stand? Now we get to the good part. Now we get to the land and the town. Remember, our gold rush picture has 3 roles, not 2. There is panning for gold, which is building the model, and we have agreed that is for the giants. There is selling picks and shovels, which is the chips and the plumbing. And that is mostly for the giants too, because making chips needs fabulously expensive factories. But there is a third role we have not explored yet, and it is the one the 1849 story is secretly about. It is owning the land and owning the town, the general store, the hotel, the bank, the laundry, the blue jeans, the boring, durable businesses that the gold flows through no matter who strikes it lucky and who goes home broke. In AI terms, owning the land and the town means owning the things a model can never simply hand out for free, no matter how smart it gets. And there are really 4 of them. The first is proprietary data, which is information only you have. The second is distribution, which is having a direct line to a lot of customers who already trust you. The third is the workflow, which means being woven so deeply into how someone actually does their job that pulling you out would be painful. And the fourth is the relationship and the trust itself. Notice something lovely about all four. A smarter, cheaper model does not threaten them. It makes them more valuable. If you own the only data about how a particular hospital schedules its operating theaters, then every time the models get cheaper and smarter, your data becomes a more powerful lever, not a weaker one. You are not standing on the rising floor. You are holding the deed to the land underneath it. And it is worth telling you that even the experts changed their minds about this because it is a small lesson in honesty. A few years ago, one of the most influential investment firms in this whole field looked at the AI stack and declared, more or less, that there were no lasting moats anywhere in it. A moat, by the way, is just the old word for whatever protects a business from competitors, like the water-filled ditch around a castle. Their argument was that everyone trains on roughly the same data, runs on roughly the same chips, made in roughly the same factories, so nobody can build a real wall. It was a striking claim, and a lot of people repeated it. But here is the honest part. By a couple of years later, that same firm had quietly walked it back. They came to argue that defensibility was, in fact, emerging after all, and that things like a trusted brand name, a flywheel of proprietary data that keeps spinning faster the more customers you serve, and simply owning the direct relationship with the customer, were turning into real moats. So the truth landed in between the two slogans. It is neither AI has no moats anywhere, nor moats are guaranteed. It is that the moats are real, but you have to build them deliberately out of exactly the four things we just named, and they will not appear on their own. This is the heart of the whole strategy, so let me say it as plainly as I can. Do not build a thin wrapper that the next model swallows. Build a complement that gets better as the models get cheaper and smarter. Solve a real expensive, specific problem in a specific industry. Own the data and own the distribution, and use the AI itself to run extremely lean with a tiny team. Each of those is a sentence you could spend a career on, so let me take them one by one, because this is where the rubber actually meets the road. Start with solving a real, expensive problem in a specific industry. The fancy phrase for this is vertical AI. A vertical just means a single deep slice of the economy, one industry top to bottom, like law or healthcare or accounting or construction. The opposite is horizontal, meaning a little bit of everything for everyone. The thin wrapper that writes generic text for anyone is horizontal, and horizontal is exactly where the giants live and exactly where things get commoditized first. Vertical is where a smaller, sharper player can win, because the giants are too busy building the general brain to learn the thousand tiny, unglamorous rules of how a mid-sized law firm actually bills its clients, or how a radiology department actually reads a scan, or how a freight company actually plans its routes. And there is a profound shift in what you are even selling when you go vertical, and one of the most respected investment firms in this field has given it a name that is worth carrying with you. They call it the move from software to service as a software. For decades, technology companies sold software, meaning a tool that helps a human do their job faster. The market for tools is large, hundreds of billions of dollars. But the market for the actual human labor, the work itself, the services, is many times larger. It runs into the trillions. And the bet they are making is that AI agents, which are just AI systems set up to actually carry out a task from start to finish rather than only answer a question, can begin to do the work itself, not just assist with it. And if your AI does the work, you can charge for the result, the outcome, rather than charging a monthly fee for a tool. You stop selling the prospector a shovel, and you start selling them the gold already dug, weighed and delivered. This is genuinely where new fortunes appear to be forming, and I can point at real, fast, growing examples, though I am going to wrap every single number in the word reportedly, because almost all of these are private companies, and their figures are self-reported or leaked, never independently audited. With that caution firmly in place, here is the shape of it. There is an AI coding tool that reportedly reached around $2 billion in annualized revenue, having got there startlingly fast within a few years of launch. There is a legal AI company built specifically for lawyers that has reportedly reached a valuation in the billions and is reportedly embedded in something like half of the largest American law firms. There is a customer service agent company founded by people who had already built big things before that reportedly crossed $100 million of annual revenue in under 2 years. Notice the common thread. None of these is a general chatbot. Each one went narrow and deep into coding, into law, into customer service, and owned that ground. The overall category of these AI agents that do the work has reportedly grown from a few $1 billion to several billion in a single year, with forecasts of it reaching the tens of billions by the end of the decade. I will be honest and say those forecasts come largely from single estimate firms, so treat the precise figures as direction, not destiny. But the direction is unmistakable. Now here is a quieter, almost magical part of the modern version of this story, and it is the fourth piece of our strategy. You can do it with a tiny team. Throughout most of business history, building something worth a fortune meant hiring thousands of people. The AI era is bending that rule in a way we have genuinely never seen before, because the same AI you are building on also lets a handful of people do the work that used to need 100. The people who study this market describe AI applications as the fastest growing category in the history of software, with dozens of products crossing $100 million of annual revenue and a handful crossing $1 billion, often with remarkably small teams. The leverage, meaning how much output you can get from each person, is unlike anything before. So the dream of a very small group of people building something enormous is, for the first time, not pure fantasy. It is rare, but it is real. And now I have to turn and face you honestly because I promise no hype. This is the part most of these get rich stories carefully leave out, and it is the part that matters most. Let me give you the first honest caveat, and it has a name. People in this field call it the $600 billion question. A well-known investor did a careful back of the envelope calculation a while ago. He looked at how much money is being spent building all this AI infrastructure, all those chips and data centers, and he asked a simple, devastating question. How much actual revenue would all these AI products need to earn from real customers to justify all that spending? His method was rough and he said so. He took the chip maker's revenue, doubled it to account for the full cost of running data centers, then doubled it again to leave room for a sensible profit margin. And he arrived at a figure of something like $600 billion a year that the industry would need to be earning to pay for what it is building. The trouble is the actual AI revenue out there in the real world is, so far, dramatically smaller than that. The gap is enormous, on the order of hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, I want to be careful and fair here because this gets twisted in both directions. Some people wave that number around as proof that the whole thing is a bubble about to burst. That is not what the man who calculated it said. He himself called it, and I am quoting his framing, not a fabricated number, a time lag rather than necessarily a bubble. Meaning the revenue might still arrive just later than the spending. The honest position, the grown-up position, is neither this is all about to collapse, nor there is nothing to worry about. The honest position is that there is a very large, unresolved gap between what is being spent and what is being earned, and nobody truly knows yet how it closes. He also flagged something subtle and important. Those expensive chips lose their value faster than people assume, because the next generation arrives and makes the last one look slow, so the shovels you bought at a premium are worth much less in a couple of years than you paid. That matters for anyone betting the farm on this. Now the second honest caveat, and this is the one I most want you to feel in your bones, because it is the one that protects you. It is survivorship bias. Survivorship bias is the quiet error of only studying the survivors. Imagine you only ever interviewed people who won the lottery and asked them their secret. You would come away thinking the secret was buying a ticket on a Tuesday, because that is what they happen to do. And you would never hear from the millions who bought a ticket on a Tuesday and won nothing because they are not invited on stage. Every single success story in AI that you will ever hear, including the ones I just told you, is a lottery winner standing in the spotlight. And standing in the dark, invisible, unmentioned, is a vast graveyard of companies that did almost exactly the same thing, with similar founders and similar ideas and similar pitches, and failed anyway. The base rates here are sobering, and they are worth stating plainly. Across venture-backed startups, something like 3 out of 4 fail to return the money put into them. Only around 1 in 10 startups is still going strong after 10 years. Technology in particular has among the very highest failure rates of any sector, with well over half of attempts failing. And yet, here is the cruel beauty of it. Technology also produces the most enormous winners. That combination is what people mean when they say this is a power law. A power law just means a world where a tiny number of outliers are so gigantic that they alone account for almost all the winnings, while the overwhelming majority get little or nothing. It is not a bell curve where most people land somewhere in the comfortable middle. It is a world of a few towering giants and a long, quiet field of the broke and the forgotten. So when someone who got rich tells you their formula, listen with warmth, learn what you can, but remember they are describing the one path that happened to work for them, not the 1,000 identical paths that led others off a cliff. And remember too that the tidy phrase self-made hides a great deal. The honest research on this is clear that timing, luck, who you happen to know, and whether you had access to capital and a safety net, all play roles that the success stories systematically underweight. The person who could afford to fail 3 times before it worked had an advantage invisible in their own telling of it. None of this is to make you cynical. It is to make you clear-eyed, which is a far more useful thing to be. Let me bring in a human beat here, because all of this can stay too abstract, and the gold rush was, in the end, about people. Picture the most common figure of 1849. Not the lucky few who struck a rich seam. The far more typical one. A young person who sold everything they owned, said goodbye to family, traveled for months at real risk to their life, arrived exhausted, paid wildly inflated prices for a pick and a pan, because remember the shovel sellers were doing fine, and then spent a year up to their knees in cold water, finding little or nothing, and eventually drifted into the town and took a job in the very general store that had been quietly profiting off people exactly like them the whole time. That was the typical story, not tragedy exactly, but not the dream they were sold either. And here is the thing I find genuinely moving about it, and genuinely useful. Many of those people did, in the end, build decent lives. Not by striking gold, but by noticing where they actually were standing. The blacksmith who realized the town needed horseshoes more than it needed another prospector. The cook who realized hungry miners would pay handsomely for a hot meal. The person who looked around at the chaos and asked, not, where is the gold, but what does everyone here desperately need that I can provide that does not depend on my own luck? That question, asked honestly, is worth more than any map to a gold field. And it is exactly the question that turns the AI gold rush from a lottery you probably lose into a craft you can actually practice. So what does all of this mean for you, the actual person listening today with whatever you have? Let me try to make it real. And let me be careful not to promise you the moon. First, notice that starting today almost certainly does not mean becoming a billionaire today, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you a pick at gold rush prices. What starting today honestly means is starting to ship, starting to learn, and starting to hunt for your own unfair advantage. Shipping just means putting a real thing in front of real people and seeing what happens instead of polishing a plan forever. Learning means using these tools so much that you understand in your hands, not just your head, what they are genuinely good at and where they fall on their face. And the unfair advantage is the most important word in this whole episode. It is your version of owning the land. It is the thing you have that most other people racing in do not. Maybe you have spent 15 years inside an industry, and in your bones, the expensive, annoying, repetitive problem that everyone there hates, and no outsider even understands. Maybe you have a relationship with a group of customers who already trust you. Maybe you have access to a slice of data nobody else can easily get. That is your land, that is your town. That is the thing the rising floor cannot swallow. Second, when you do build the complement, not the wrapper. Ask yourself one ruthless question about whatever you make if the underlying models get twice as smart and half as expensive next year. Does my thing get more valuable or less? If the answer is less, you have built a wrapper and the escalator is coming for you. If the answer is more, because you own the data or the distribution or you are woven into the workflow, then you have built something that rides the wave instead of being drowned by it. That single question is the most valuable thing I can hand you today. Third, go narrow. Resist the gravitational pull toward building the thing for everyone, because the thing for everyone is precisely the thing the giants will give away for free to sell more of their gold. Go so deep into one real, specific, expensive problem that you become the obvious answer for the few thousand people who have that exact problem. A small pond you own beats an ocean you are drowning in. And fourth, hold the whole thing humbly. Use the tiny team leverage. Spend as little as you can while you learn. Expect to be wrong several times, and keep the base rates in view, not to scare yourself out of trying, but to keep you sane and solvent while you do. The people who survive a gold rush are rarely the most feverish. They are usually the most clear-eyed. Now, before I give you the last line, I want to step gently out of the world of billion-dollar valuations because there is something quieter and honestly more important hiding inside all of this. Everything we have talked about, owning the land, knowing the specific real problems of real people, being woven into how a community actually works, building trust that no model can hand out for free, that is not only how a handful of people get rich. It is also, on a human scale, how ordinary places get better. The most valuable knowledge in the world is often the local, specific, hard-won kind. The plumber down the road who knows every quirk of the old houses on your street. The shopkeeper who knows what the neighborhood actually needs before the neighborhood does. That knowledge is the land and the town on the scale of a real community. And that is exactly the spirit behind a project I genuinely care about, called Hyperlocal, which is about helping your local world, your suburb, your high street, your neighbors connect and work together better so that the value created by all this technology lands close to home and not only in a few towers far away. If that idea speaks to you, please do subscribe so these conversations keep finding you, and have a look at Hyperlocal, because the future does not have to be a far off goldfield. It can be your own town working a little better. So here we are, back where we started. In the gold rush of 1849, most of the miners who chased the gold went home with empty pockets, and the people who quietly grew rich sold the picks, the shovels, and the blue jeans, and owned the land and the town the gold flowed through. The metal in the rivers ran out. The town remained. The lesson, more than 170 years later, has not changed at all. Do not spend your one life panning for a nugget you will probably never find. Look around at the rush, ask what everyone here desperately needs, and go own a small, real, durable piece of the land.